I'm going home to my parents.
Does anyone actually say this line? Until a short while ago, I thought so too. But I have already put up with enough to make these words sound like they're not enough. As I was packing up my belongings and leaving the house, my husband said,
Hey, you are a stupid woman to the end. You forgot these important divorce papers. If you ever come near this house again, I won't hesitate to call the police.
With these infuriating words, my husband half forcefully kicked me out of the house. After looking at the door, which had been shut vigorously for a while, "This is the end of his life, isn't it?" I muttered to myself and walked out lightly. My name is Kimmy, a 33-year-old office worker. I have been married for 3 years to my husband Dylan, whom I met through a friend. By the way, we don't have children yet, so we're renting, and whenever our schedules match, we take a vacation and go away a little. I was happy enough with such a life. However, my husband seems to have changed, and so my life has changed drastically. It was about a year and a half ago. The parent company of the company where my husband works asked my husband to join them. Before that, there was not much difference in our salaries, but since then, my husband's salary has increased significantly. Because of this, my husband became arrogant to me. He used to do the chores, but then, "You're in charge of taking out the trash today, right? You forgot, so I rushed to take it out." He looked at me a little suspiciously and said,
You know, I've been thinking for a while that it's not right for us to share the housework in the first place. I'm the one putting more money into the house, so you should take the initiative and do the house chores out of gratitude.
He began to complain, saying as if something was wrong. He used to be a person who could honestly apologize when he forgot to take out the trash. I was so offended by his words that I said to him, "Well, let me tell you something too. Dylan, just because you got a raise doesn't mean you have to behave like that." At my words, he let out a huff and said,
I'm not trying to be arrogant. I'm just saying I'm proud of me. Thanks to me, we were able to have this house, you know. You should realize how blessed you are.
After saying this, my husband quickly went to take a bath. As my husband said, we have been living in a newly built house for a while now. But I didn't want a house like this. My workplace was too far away, and I hated where the house stood in the first place. When I opened the curtains, directly across the street stood the house where his parents lived. I looked at them and let out a deep sigh. This is just like living together with your in-laws, isn't it? I muttered to myself and closed the curtains with some force. The reason why this was happening was that it had been a while since my husband had started working for the parent company.
Kimmy, I've decided to build a house.
At the time, we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment, which was large enough for the two of us. It was close to the station, and the rent was reasonable for the location, which I liked. I had never heard of my husband wanting to build a home of his own, so I was surprised.
My dad and the other guys told me that if I got a pay raise, I should definitely do that. I was beginning to think that was true, and my parents were even going to put a down payment on a house.
Furthermore, without even consulting me, he said that he and my parents-in-law had already gone to several construction companies for consultation. How could anyone hear such a thing and not be offended? What? Why are you making such an important decision without me? It's not like we're having a baby, and it doesn't have to be right now. I looked at him in dismay, and he said,
Actually, my father has cancer. I just heard the other day, and I'm his only son, so I want to live close by in case something happens to him.
When someone says something like that to me, of course, I don't want to be the devil. I couldn't say anything strongly to him anymore. Even my mother-in-law, who usually never contacted me, said, "We're getting old, aren't we? I would feel relieved and very happy if you and your husband lived nearby." She frequently contacted me like that. Incidentally, if you ask me if I like or dislike my relationship with my parents-in-law, I dislike them. They look down on people and make me feel very uncomfortable. My parents-in-law were opposed to our marriage at first. The reason was my family structure. My mother was a very toxic person, and I don't have a single good memory of her that I want to recall. After the divorce, I lived with my father, but my parents-in-law did not like that. Whatever your reasons were, you grew up with a single father, didn't you? If you have children in the future, will you be able to take care of them as a mother? My mother-in-law said this to me when we first met. At that time, my husband still has some common sense. He even told me that if I got scolded by my mother-in-law too much, we would cut off ties with her. However, when I mentioned the name of the company I worked for, her attitude changed completely. I work for a company that is not a major corporation but is well known locally. Perhaps because of this, I was paid about the same salary as my husband. I was quite disgusted by this attitude of my parents-in-law. But after that, they never nagged me about it. Still, when I visited my in-laws, Kimmy, I know you have a hard job, but isn't it time you started thinking about having children? You are over 30 years old, and when I was your age, I was doing my best to raise my kid. It was quite stressful because she would talk forever about things that I had trouble replying to. My father-in-law was a quiet man, but he had a way of assuming that housework was a woman's job, and if I tried to sit down at my parents-in-law's house for even a minute, he'd say,
Hey, if you have time to relax, shouldn't you normally ask, is there anything I can do to help you? No woman should be so thoughtless.
He said something incomprehensible to me as I looked at him with a dumbfounded look. There was no way I could get along with my parents-in-law like that, and of course, they continued to oppose the construction of the house. However, one thing led to another, and I decided to agree to the house. Of course, my husband and parents-in-law were delighted. And when the house was completed, my in-laws visited the house unannounced, as I had expected.
It's nice to have a new house after all. It looks like you won't be using the rooms for the kids, so maybe we should sell the old house and make room for us. I listened with a wry smile to this nonsense. The wives in the neighborhood like to stand around and talk, and every morning when I go to work, a few of them get together for a little meeting. They greet me with smiles, but soon I could hear them whispering behind me. I'm sure she's having a hard time making the mortgage on their house. With those in-laws, I bet she's having a hard time. I heard them talking like that. My mother-in-law and everyone else definitely hate me, huh? I couldn't help but laugh. My husband and in-laws were taking advantage of the fact that I didn't say anything, and they were being rude more and more every day. Hey, hurry up and make dinner. Who do you think you owe your livelihood to?
These words from my husband had become a daily routine. My parents-in-law would also bring up the down payment on the house. Please don't make Dylan do the housework. Thanks to Dylan and us, you have such a nice house. Don't you ever forget that. My mother-in-law said this to me over and over again as if it was her habit. One day, my husband forgot to take out the trash again. Not that he forgot, but it was completely on purpose. I told my husband, who had a blank expression on his face and was about to go to work, You're on garbage duty today, right? I called out to him, but my husband threw a shoehorn at me with a great force.
You're the one who has to take out the trash. If you have a problem with it, you can get a divorce.
My husband grinned at me, and I simply said, Okay, then let's get a divorce. I'm going back to my parents' house. My husband's eyes widened for a moment, but then as if he had been waiting for me to say it, he said,
You said it, okay? You can't take back your words now, can you? If that's the way you want to play it, get out of here right now.
I ignored my husband, who was laughing hysterically, and packed up my belongings. My husband looked at me from behind with a smirk on his face. As I was about to leave the house, he pulled something out of his bag.
Hey, you are a stupid woman to the end. You forgot the important divorce papers. If you come near this house from now on, I won't hesitate to call the police.
With a triumphant look on his face, he handed me the signed divorce papers. Wow, you are very well prepared. And you look so happy. It's as if you've been waiting for this moment for a long time. My husband's words made me frown a little, and he half forcefully kicked me out of the house. The door slammed shut behind him, and I looked at it for a moment. This is the end of his life, huh? I muttered to myself and walked out lightly. It was about a month later, I returned to my parents' house and spent peaceful time with my father. One holiday morning, however, the intercom rang. I checked the monitor. "Dad, they're here." From my words, my father strode to the front door.
What do they want? So it's Dylan and his father and mother. Please come in. We don't want to stand around talking.
The three of them stared at my father as he coldly told them to do so. When they entered the room and saw me,
Kimmy! You've got to be kidding me.
Dylan yelled at me. I responded, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, maybe that thing has arrived by now?" "Well, you've done things that were way out of character, you know. It's not worth it if you don't at least pay me." He must have received the certified letter from me. I smiled, but my ex-family-in-law's faces were red. Dylan, my ex-husband, said to my father,
Why didn't you tell me? As soon as the divorce was finalized, I received a relocation notice to a subsidiary company. My salary would go down considerably, and when I protested to my boss, your name came up. Don't you think it's very unprofessional to demote me for personal reasons out of your love for your daughter? Take responsibility and tell my boss to withdraw my relocation.
My father sighed at my ex-husband, who was furious.
You say that you are feeling held back because of your salary. Kimmy consulted with me about it before, you know. I thought a higher salary would boost your confidence, so it was I who introduced you to your boss. I kept quiet about it because I thought it would hurt your petty pride. I still regret it, because instead of building your self-confidence, you only became a monster.
As my father had said, my ex-husband thought he was hired for his abilities, but it's actually not quite true. It was because of my father's verbal support. My father and my ex-husband's boss had been friends for many years, and when my father put in a word for him, the boss agreed to help. The fact that my ex-husband was approached by his boss, who had a high position in the company, seemed to have given him a lot of confidence. However, his confidence took a turn for the worse, and he became overbearing at work as well. Even without my divorce, it was only a matter of time before he was transferred.
He's a very loyal guy, so he was very concerned about me and my daughter. He was having a hard time getting rid of you. When I told him about my daughter's divorce, he was relieved. I feel deeply sorry that I introduced someone like you to him.
When my ex-husband found out that I had actually introduced him to my father, he called me like crazy, but of course, I ignored all of them. I guess he got enough of me not answering his phone calls and thus came to protest in person. Of course, that's not all. My ex-mother-in-law was shaking and trembling. It said, compensation for emotional distress. Who do you think you are? You're overreacting. We will never pay you. I said to my ex-mother-in-law, who was ranting at me, It's not up to you to decide. If you have a problem with us, you should get a lawyer. You were intending to sell your old house and move in with us anyway, right? Well, why don't you pay me with that money? You even lied to me about having cancer so you could build that house for Lisa, didn't you? They were smiling at me, but now my in-laws' faces turned pale. I had always wanted to see that on your faces, you know. Did you think I didn't notice anything? Don't underestimate me. When my ex-husband started saying he wanted to build a house, I felt a certain discomfort. My ex-husband, who until then had been indifferent about his appearance, suddenly became fashionable. I immediately had an intuition, and of course suspected him of cheating on me.
I don't want to build a house where there are strange people in the neighborhood. That's why I've always been okay with renting.
Now his words had become reality. Suddenly he started saying he wanted to build a house despite not wanting to previously. It's like he's asking me to doubt him. Around the same time, I started getting likes on my social media account from a woman I didn't know. This woman, she only likes the pictures with Dylan in them. Feeling creeped out, I peeked into that person's social media account. I found that it was filled with photos of her with someone who appeared to be her boyfriend, although his back was turned to the camera. But no matter how I looked at them, the other person was my ex-husband. She wrote things like, I hope he leaves his wife soon. he was going to build a house for me, and all sorts of stuff that she fantasized about. The fact that she approached me suggests that she deliberately wanted to show me her social media account. I decided to fight looking at the social media account of this rather provocative woman named Lisa. "I heard you got remarried. Congratulations." "Oh, I see you're not with Lisa today, are you? Maybe she ran away?" Even though she was the one who started the fight with me. But it's no use running away. I did some research and it turns out that Lisa, the woman with whom he had an affair, is a childhood friend of my ex-husband's. And she seems to be very close to my ex-mother-in-law, who had wanted her to marry my ex-husband for a long time. When Lisa, the cheating partner, quit her job and came back to her hometown, the two of them met up again for the first time in a long time. Lisa seemed quite taken with my ex-husband when she found out where he worked, and it turned out that she had been aggressively approaching him even though she knew he was married. It seems that Lisa was actually my ex-husband's first love, and the two of them quickly got in an affair. At that time, she still had her parents, and my ex-husband thought about quitting many times. He couldn't handle his problems, so what did he do? He talked to his parents, and his mother said, "It's easy. Divorce Kimmy and marry Lisa. Of course, I'm against such a workaholic woman. She's not even pretty. But you're thinking that if she finds out, you'll have to pay alimony and all that, won't you? So, in that case..." The result of their discussion was a plan to treat me excessively harshly and kick me out of the house. Can't believe that she was crazy enough to cooperate with her son instead of scolding him. I laughed at him because he seemed to really think that if I left the house voluntarily, alimony would be irrelevant. It was the cheater who wanted the house, and it was my former in-laws who advised him that the loan would surely be easier to pass during his marital relationship with me. Because if I kept living with them, they could always pick on me to get rid of me. I kept the recording of their outbursts in order to get a favorable divorce, which turned to be quite a lot. When it was time to get the divorce out of the way, I was told to leave, so I just left.
I couldn't tell Lisa that I might be transferred, so I registered without telling her. But then she found out somehow, and so... Come on! Help me out. The mortgage, the alimony. There's no way I can pay them on my own salary. My ex-husband started crying pitifully. I looked at him with cold eyes. "What are you talking about? We are strangers now." I was quite hurt, and you said a lot of terrible words to me. I still cry when I listen to the recording. Please pay me the alimony. Of course, I won't reduce it. As I stared at the three of them, my ex-mother-in-law said to me, "Don't you have any humanity in you at all? Dylan is apologizing to you and you act like a big shot. That's why I didn't want him to be married to a woman who was raised by a single father." At this, I got furious. You think you can just say whatever you want? My father would force himself to go to work, even when he wasn't feeling well, and yet he always smiled so that I wouldn't worry. You don't know anything. I was so frustrated that tears involuntarily welled up in my eyes. As I cried, my father gently placed his hand on my shoulder. Kimmy, you don't have to cry for these people. Your future is bright. In comparison, what awaits these people is a path of destruction. Are we done? We and you guys are strangers. If you make any more noise, I will call the police. My ex-father-in-law stood up vigorously, as if he didn't want to go to the police. Don't make such a big deal about the police. We'll leave you now. He called out to them, saying, "Come on, let's go," and left as if they were running away from something. Excuse us, he said, but they were the ones who came here out of the blue. What the heck was he saying? They were crazy until the end, huh? My father laughed when he said that. Later, I ran into one of the nosy neighbors again. I had a chance to ask them what they were up to. She told me that my ex-husband and ex-parents-in-laws still live in that new house. Eventually, my ex-husband was transferred. To pay off the mortgage and to make ends meet, even with my ex-parents-in-law's pension, they seemed to be struggling.
And to my surprise, my ex-parents-in-law also started working. The house was built for Lisa, but she is not there. It seems that she gave up on my ex-husband early after that and left quickly, leaving the divorce papers behind. She explained to her parents that after Dylan's divorce from me, she developed a romantic relationship with Dylan, who was heartbroken while spending time with him. I had sent a content-certified letter to Lisa's parents as well, so everything came to light and her angry parents disowned her. I shuddered to think of the community of wives in the neighborhood who knew so much. Lisa, through her lawyer, brazenly demanded a reduction in the rent, but there was no way I would comply. I glanced at Lisa's social media account. All the photos had been erased except for a pitch-black picture. She had only this to say, which was written there: "It wasn't supposed to be like this." She seems to be working from morning till night to pay off the debt she had incurred to pay my alimony. I have always believed that there is no such thing as happiness built on misery. That's because it will all come back one day. I want them to live the rest of their lives with regret. As for me, I am getting along well with my father at home. I apologized to him for coming back, but he said,
What are you talking about? As long as you're laughing, Dad is fine with that. I want you to be happy. That's all I ever wanted, before and even now.
I was so happy to hear it that I cried. I'm so glad he is my father, and I softly laughed as I thought of this.
My husband won't provide living expenses. Tired wife escapes. Shocked husband sees her drastic changes. Lol.
Don't indulge yourself when you're just a housewife. Who do you think is supporting you so that you can live like this? You're just at home and not doing anything every day. Don't you know the saying, he who does not work shall not eat? Despite quitting my job at my husband's request and becoming a full-time housewife, he barely gives me any living expenses and won't let me work. Aggressive and domineering, he would belittle people and laugh at them. This was my husband's true nature. I can divorce you any time I want. You probably can't make it on your own as a full-time housewife with nothing to offer, but if you serve me well, I'll let you stay in this house. Aren't I a nice guy? Show some gratitude. Usually I would say, You're right. Thanks to you. I appreciate your hard work. There was no falsehood in those words of gratitude. I had faint hope that we would one day respect each other. But now I've reached my limit. I'm going to indulge myself. What? I'll divorce you and make money on my own to indulge myself. What are you talking about? Now I'll show him my true nature. My name is Nancy, and I'm a soon-to-be 30-year-old housewife. I've loved clothes and drawing them since I was a child. I would often draw clothes I wanted to wear when I grew up on the drawing paper my mother bought me. Whenever I was asked about my future dreams in elementary school, I would say I wanted to be a fashion designer. After graduating from a fashion design vocational school, I worked at a general company. Of course, I had hoped to work for a fashion design company to make use of what I learned at school, but it seemed I had no luck at that time, as I unfortunately failed the final interview. Lacking the courage to try again, I ended up working for a company unrelated to fashion design. Around the time I got used to working as an office worker, I met my current husband Darren, who was in sales. I was in administration, so I didn't have much direct contact with the sales department, but we happened to sit next to each other at the company's year-end party, which was the start of our relationship. From then on, whenever we passed each other in the company, we'd exchange a few words and gradually became closer. Eventually, after going out to eat several times, he asked me to date him. About a year after we started dating, he proposed and we decided to get married. Now we live together in a rented apartment, just the two of us. We don't have any children. I thought having children would be fun, but he doesn't like kids. I can't force him, so there's nothing I can do about it. My friends often tell me that if I want kids, I should leave him, but I'd rather be with him even without kids. I loved his straightforward personality with a touch of kindness. However, about a year after we got married, he changed. I quit my job and became a full-time housewife right after we got married because he strongly wished for it. His mother, my mother-in-law, was a successful career woman, but he didn't seem to like that. It appears that coming home from school to an empty house during his childhood still casts a shadow on his heart, and he wanted me to be at home to welcome him after work. I didn't have any particular dislikes to becoming a full-time housewife because my mother was one. On the other hand, I had started to find my job rewarding, even though the company I joined wasn't my first choice, and it was hard to leave. But I understood how he felt. Coming home tired to an empty house must be lonely. I didn't want to make him feel that way since I loved him. So I quit my job and became a full-time housewife. And about a year after becoming a housewife, his behavior suddenly changed one day. "Hey, Nancy, you're a housewife, so don't waste the money I earn." "What's gotten into you?" "I'm not wasting money." I genuinely didn't know what he was talking about, so I responded that way, and he raised his voice. "Don't talk back. You're just a housewife. Who do you think is supporting you so that you can live like this? You're just sitting at home all day and not doing anything. Don't you even think about being useful to me? Don't you know the proverb, 'He who does not work shall not eat'?" At that time, I thought he was just in a bad mood, so I said, "I'm sorry. It's all thanks to you," to calm him down. But that was a mistake. Whether he got a taste for it or it became a habit, he kept verbally abusing me day after day. Along with that, he started giving me very little living expenses. "This is all I get for this month's living expenses? We can't live on this." "Don't complain. Just don't waste money. If you want to waste money, do it on your own. I can divorce you anytime I want. You probably can't make it on your own as a full-time housewife with nothing to offer, but if you serve me well, I'll let you stay in this house. Aren't I a nice guy? Show some gratitude." He became aggressive, a completely different person from a year ago. He never used to say things like that. I wonder what happened. Could it be that this was his true nature from the beginning? Why do you say such terrible things? Becoming a full-time housewife was your wish in the first place. Is money tight? If so, I can work part-time. If you don't like coming home to an empty house, I'll make sure I'm back before you are. When I said that, he laughed mockingly. "You're too slow to work and be a housewife at the same time. It's absolutely not allowed because housework will be neglected. You should just stay at home and quietly do housework." After that, we had the same kind of exchanges repeatedly. Not only did he say these things directly, but he would also send me messages on my phone during his work hours, saying things like, "I hope you're not eating an expensive lunch. Don't go shopping without permission. And just stay quiet at home." I couldn't accept these words at all. In the end, Darren didn't allow me to work part-time. So I had no choice but to make ends meet with the bare minimum living expenses he provided each month. In addition to the abuse from him, I gradually felt concerned as my life became increasingly difficult. Amidst this life, I received a call from Andrea, my best friend from vocational school. We used to meet frequently and have meals or go shopping before I got married, but we hadn't seen each other in a while. She laughed happily on the other end of the phone, saying, "It's been a long time. I wanted to hear your voice." Hearing my best friend's voice for the first time in a while, I couldn't help but cry. I tried to keep the phone away from my face so she wouldn't notice, but she seemed to see right through me. Nancy, are you crying? What happened? I'll listen if you want to talk. Taking her up on her offer, I told her in detail about my current life. She quietly listened to my disjointed story without interruption. I didn't know Darren was like that. He seemed like such a nice person. I didn't notice at your wedding. I hadn't noticed either, and we have been together for a long time. It was only natural that she didn't notice after meeting him just once. Then she cleared her throat over the phone and said, I started a company, you know. Well, it's still small with only 2 employees. Really? Congratulations! You've always wanted to start a company since we were students. Thank you. I have a favor to ask you. Can you work as a fashion designer for my company? You can work from home. It was an unexpected and delightful invitation. But it's been quite some time since I graduated from vocational school, and I don't have the confidence to create good designs for work. Moreover, my husband has strictly forbidden me to work. I shared my honest feelings with her. What are you talking about? You graduated at the top of your class in design and won awards numerous times. Besides, it'll be fine if you keep it a secret from your husband. Just think of it as helping me out. Please. After much deliberation, I eventually gave in to her enthusiasm and agreed to help her with her work. To be honest, I was drawn to the idea of being able to work in fashion design again, so I decided to help her. However, I knew that if I told my husband I was going to work, he would definitely get angry. I decided to keep this a secret from him for the time being until I could come up with a good explanation. After that, I began working from home as a fashion designer only during the hours Darren was at work. There were some struggles at first because I was away from it for so long, but designing clothes was still enjoyable. I diligently worked through trial and error, and before I knew it, half a year had passed. I realized I was earning enough to be independent without relying on my husband's income. Of course, that was thanks to Andrea. She had promoted and introduced work to me, an unknown designer, which allowed me to earn this income. That's when I suddenly thought, is there any meaning to being married to Darren? The abuse continued even after I secretly started working in fashion design, and some months our living expenses were barely enough, if not in deficit. If I were unemployed, without a place to go, and without savings, I would have to rely on him, but now there's no need for that. Wouldn't it be better not to have a husband who lacks empathy and does nothing but insult me? That's it. I'll get a divorce. It felt so natural that I wondered why I hadn't thought of it before. It was as if my vision had suddenly cleared. While my resolve was still unwavering, I called Andrea to declare my decision. Andrea, I'm going to divorce Darren. I've decided to become independent. Finally, you've come to your senses. It's definitely better that way. I'll help you, so don't hesitate to ask if there's anything I can do. With her encouraging words in my heart, I promptly presented Darren with a completed divorce paper that very night. He sprang up from the living room sofa where he had been lying down without even changing his clothes after coming home from work. I placed the divorce papers on the table in front of the sofa. He snatched them up and looked at them closely before throwing them down roughly. What's this? Don't be stupid and talk about divorce. You should be serving me as a housewife for the rest of your life. It suits you perfectly. Besides, how will you live after the divorce? Where will you live? What about clothes? Food? You don't have the money to make it on your own after the divorce, do you? I can't live with you anymore. I became a housewife at your request, but I can't stand being insulted and ordered around. And don't worry about the money. Take a look at this. I shoved something in front of his eyes. Nancy, why do you have so much savings? Were you working behind my back? His eyes widened as he looked at the bank book I presented. Yes, these are the earnings from the designs I created and sold. I used this to supplement our living expenses when there weren't enough. Are you grateful? As I said this, Darren, who had been sitting on the sofa, rose abruptly. He seemed about to insult me again, but instead he drew a deep breath and smiled smugly. On second thought, you can work. If you want to work so badly, you can be the one to earn the money now. I'll become a stay-at-home husband. His intentions were obvious. He was trying to exploit me to the fullest and control me as he pleased. But that's not going to happen anymore. He can barely operate a washing machine, let alone become a house husband. I wish he'd save his nonsense for when he was dreaming. You coward! I won't let you have your way anymore. Fine. Just hurry up and divorce me. I picked up the divorce paper he had thrown earlier and slammed them back onto the table. Perhaps he didn't expect me to take such a hostile attitude, and he shuddered, his shoulders trembling, as he muttered weakly, Why? I quickly packed my things and left the house. Thankfully, Andrea let me stay at her place for the time being. At first, Darren, who had been served with divorce papers, grumbled. I don't want a divorce. I was deceived. But my daily journals, household account books, and screenshots of the abusive messages he had sent sealed the deal, and the divorce went through smoothly. The lawyer I had consulted for the divorce was someone Andrea had helped me find. Thanks to her, I was able to find a very skilled attorney. I really couldn't thank her enough for all she had done for me. When I told her this, she laughed heartily and said, Don't worry about it. We're best friends. But if you really want to repay me, you can do it through your designs. About half a month later, I found a new place to live. Thanks to her aggressive sales efforts, I was able to greatly increase my opportunities as a fashion designer. Of course, I still have a lot to learn and little experience in taking on jobs, but I'm sure my future is bright. And from what I've heard, Darren's life after the divorce has been miserable. First of all, with me gone, there was no one to do the housework, and the room we used to live in quickly turned into a garbage-filled mess. On top of that, he had no habit of properly managing his suits, so his appearance became sloppy, and he started receiving harsh complaints from clients saying, Don't send such a dirty person for sales. Furthermore, the complaint issues spread within the company, and his colleagues and subordinates began to distance themselves from him. He was eventually transferred from the sales department to warehouse management. Unable to bear it, he ultimately resigned voluntarily. Without any income and unable to manage his money properly, he quickly found himself in debt and was evicted from his apartment. He is now said to be struggling even to find food for the day. In fact, there was one time when he barged into Andrea's company. I was working from home at the time, so I wasn't there. When she spotted Darren walking around yelling trying to find me, she used her expert judo skills to throw him off. She then promptly reported him to the police, and he was taken away quietly. I was surprised when I heard about it later, and I worried whether Andrea would be targeted for revenge. But at the same time, I felt relieved. She seemed to feel the same way, saying with a mischievous expression, It was a little scary, but I finally feel refreshed. After all, I have to make sure he pays for all the suffering you went through, right? I may have failed in my marriage, but I was able to gain something much more precious. I vowed in my heart to cherish the time I have now working with my beloved best friend on the job I love.
My husband. I'll build mom's house, so I demolished yours. Lol me. That's not my house. He what? Lol.
Your family home is being demolished right now. My husband Derek suddenly told me over the phone, leaving me speechless. The picture he sent me showed my childhood home being brutally torn apart. I am Kim, and I live with my husband Derek and his mother Mary. I met Derek at work, but I quit my job after we got married, and now I'm a busy housewife. I later found out that before our marriage, Derek seemed like a kind and reliable person, but he was actually a mama's boy. Once we started living with Mary, his true colors began to show. His devotion to his mother was nauseating, as he always prioritized her over me, his wife. Everything in our home, from the interior design to the furniture and daily meals, was decided according to her wishes. Just by drinking coffee, she quickly became the queen of our household, and I was left to do all the housework like her servant. Derek didn't care at all about how miserable or exhausted I felt. I'm starting to wonder if I married him just to take care of her. Her arrogance escalated day by day. She never openly mistreated me in front of her son, but when we were alone, she constantly tormented me. I could bear some of her insults and silent treatment. But one day when she called my freshly brewed coffee disgusting and splashed it in my face, nearly burning me, I reached my breaking point. I tearfully confided in Derek when he came home, but he brushed it off, saying, "Mom was just in a bad mood. It's not a big deal." The next day, she was even worse, apparently having heard about my conversation with Derek. "How dare you tell my son about our little argument?" she sneered. "I wonder what kind of upbringing your parents gave you, getting so upset over a little criticism of your coffee." She conveniently forgot that she had splashed the coffee in my face. With a nasty grin, she mocked not only me, but also my parents. I could no longer bear her insults towards my parents who had raised me so lovingly. I couldn't possibly stand living under the same roof as her any longer. I proposed to my husband that we live separately from Mary. "You want me to kick out my mom? I can't do such a disrespectful thing now." "Then I'll move out," I replied without hesitation. I knew he wouldn't easily agree to living apart from her. I didn't want to live in her castle, surrounded by her tasteless hobbies any longer. I quickly filled out the divorce papers and arranged a contract for a weekly apartment. It took some time to finalize the contract, but there were plenty of ways to kill time. The next morning, I left the divorce papers on the table and hurriedly left the house. I desperately wanted to avoid going back to my parents' home. If he came looking for me, he would probably check there first. I didn't want to cause any unnecessary worry or trouble for my parents. I hurried the move so he wouldn't have a chance to interfere any further. Afterward, I arranged a trip for my parents as a gift. I broke into my savings from before I got married to finance the gift. My humble parents hesitated, but I insisted and sent them on a trip to San Francisco. I wanted them to enjoy themselves since I hadn't been able to properly show my gratitude towards them after being married, always dealing with Mary and Derek. With my parents away, they wouldn't hear from Derek for a while, so I wouldn't have to worry about him causing them trouble. I was starting to get used to my new life in the weekly apartment when Derek suddenly called. He had called several times since I left, but I had ignored them all. I reluctantly answered the phone, wondering why he was calling now. Derek sounded surprisingly cheerful on the other end of the phone, asking, "How are you?" I cautiously replied, "What do you want?" Unapologetically, he continued, "I'm having your family home demolished right now." I fell silent for a moment, not understanding what he was saying. Demolished? Did you say demolished? Like destroying? What on earth are you talking about? Don't mess with me, I retorted, still not grasping the meaning of his words. He remained nonchalant. "Yeah, I'm selling the land your family home is on to buy my mom a luxurious house." I was left speechless by his nonsensical statements. With a smug tone, he said, "We're married, so it's shared property, right?" And hung up the phone. Only the cold, electronic, disconnected tone remained. What kind of ridiculous logic is that? It's like something an alien would say. I couldn't tell if it was a prank or if he was serious, so all I could do was stare at my silent phone. Then a notification popped up immediately. A picture had been sent. It was from Derek. When I opened it, there was a picture of a house being torn down. The white walls and blue roof were just like my family home. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I tried calling him back furiously, but he completely ignored me. I couldn't help but collapse onto the floor. Later, I found out that after I had left, he went to my parents' house, as expected. He learned from a neighbor that my parents were on vacation. The neighbor also mentioned that I hadn't returned to my family home. Upon hearing this, he became outraged. "So she tells my mom to live alone while her parents go on a luxurious trip?" Though it was an absurd grudge, it must have seemed unfair to him. In a fit of anger, he decided to demolish the house as revenge. Unfortunately for him, neither my parents nor I were there. Moreover, he hadn't submitted the divorce papers yet. He thought that since we were still married, he could do whatever he wanted with my property. "Hello? Sis, are you okay?" I hurriedly called my sister, who was still living at the family home. I didn't know how he managed to do it, but if he forcefully demolished the house with her inside, what would happen to her? I anxiously waited for her to answer. After several tones, my sister answered the phone in a relaxed tone. "Hello? What's wrong? I just woke up." "The house, is it okay?" Even though I asked with a sense of urgency, my sister's attitude didn't change. It almost made me feel like I was overreacting. The house? Oh, Keith across the street seems to be having some renovation work done or something, but our house is fine. I couldn't believe it. But that had to be it. I fell silent for a moment. The house across the street from my family home, where Keith, who has been kind to us since we were little, lived, looked identical to ours. Moreover, our last names were the same, though we were not related. Because of this, we often had mix-ups with Christmas cards and visitors. In other words, the house Derek claimed to have demolished was... Oh no! It seems like Derek mistakenly demolished Keith's house instead. What? Even talking about it gave me a headache. Having our house destroyed would be bad enough, but accidentally demolishing the neighbor's house is no joke. I explained the situation to my sister and rushed to my family home. Together, we headed to Keith's house. It seemed that Derek and the contractors had already left, and the house was completely demolished. What do we do about this? My sister and I turned pale as a man with an exotic appearance, dragging a suitcase, approached us while letting out a bizarre scream. My house is gone! Keith, who had just returned from an overseas trip, exclaimed with wide eyes. My sister and I exchanged glances and then apologized. We explained the situation in detail, but it all sounded like excuses, and we couldn't help but feel sorry for involving him in all this. I am so sorry that your precious house ended up like this. My sister and I continued to apologize. We knew that apologizing wasn't enough, but it was all we could do for now. He seemed shocked by the sudden turn of events, but when we apologized, he lifted his face and spoke kindly. It's not your fault. There's someone else who needs to take responsibility. His tone was gentle, but his eyes weren't smiling. He suggested a plan to make things right. A few days later, Derek appeared in front of the demolished house with the contractors. I had called him there. It was a gamble whether he would come or not, but perhaps he was intimidated by the formal protest or simply wanted to see my crying face. Either way, he agreed to come. I went to meet him with my sister, Keith, and a lawyer. Derek seemed surprised to see me with allies, but he quickly put on a brave face. What do you want now? Nothing can be done about the demolished house. Besides, it's our shared property as a married couple. You have no right to complain. He still didn't know the truth. I responded to him with a hint of pity. The house you destroyed wasn't my family home. It was Keith's house. As I introduced him, Keith glared at Derek and stepped forward. The usually gentle man was truly terrifying when angry. Even Derek, meeting him for the first time, shrank back from Keith's intensity. Then he argued back. No, but your maiden name is Jackson, right? I checked properly before demolishing it. Hearing that he had demolished someone else's house, Derek started to panic. I sighed as if to interrupt him. It's not that unusual of a last name. We just happen to live in a similar house and have the same last name. But what are the odds? He was genuinely upset, but it sounded like a comic retort. My sister chuckled beside me. This is hilarious! So hilarious! Ignoring her, I continued. Besides, do you even understand what shared property means? My family home's land isn't part of our shared property. Maybe you should ask this lawyer here for some advice. At my signal, the lawyer handed Derek a business card. Derek seemed surprised, apparently not realizing he was a lawyer, and stared at the card. My sister leaned in to look at Derek's face and spoke to him mockingly. Don't you know Keith Jackson of our city? He's a famous landowner around here. Indeed, Keith was not just an ordinary man. As my sister later explained, he used to be an executive at the company where Derek worked, which was also the company where I met him. Sometimes his eyes would not smile, and his expressions had an aura that spoke of his influence. It's not my fault. Derek finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. He insisted repeatedly that it wasn't his fault, his previous boldness gone, replaced by a panicked demeanor. Unfortunately, the contractors, who should have been his only allies, fled as soon as they heard Keith's story. They were the kind of contractors who would demolish a house without proper investigation. Derek must have been caught by a fraudulent contractor. Enough already! Keith, who seemed to have run out of patience, yelled at Derek. The air seemed to tremble with the force of his anger. Admit your wrongdoing without any excuses! Or do you want to involve the police? At these words, Derek became completely subdued. In the end, with the lawyer present, he agreed to our side's demands, and the situation was settled. Derek signed the divorce papers, and was forced to write a letter stating that he would pay compensation to both Keith and me. The compensation amount was quite significant because of the house demolition, and he had already incurred debt for the demolition costs. The unscrupulous contractor had already taken the money and disappeared without a trace, leaving Derek with no one to rely on and struggling to repay the debt. The fallout also affected Mary. She had thought she would live with Derek in a luxurious house, but when her son demolished the house of wealthy landowner Keith Jackson, she instantly became a target of ridicule. Naturally, she could not accept such a situation, and soon she could not leave her house. As for Keith, although his house was demolished, he hadn't suffered too much damage. The reason he had gone on an overseas trip was his daughter who lived abroad. He had received an international call from his son-in-law saying that his daughter was about to give birth. Having lost his wife 20 years ago, Keith doted on his grandchild and decided to live abroad with his daughter, as she had previously consulted with him. So he intended to demolish the house and sell the land after selling his business. Of course, he was shocked because the house had disappeared sooner than expected. But he laughed, saying that the result was the same. I didn't inform my parents of anything until they returned from their San Francisco trip because I didn't want to ruin their vacation. When they returned home and heard the whole story, they turned pale and were speechless. But they were relieved that nothing had happened to me. At my parents' suggestion, Keith would stay at our house until his business was settled. I also moved back to my parents' house from the weekly apartment, and we spent our time reminiscing about our memories with them, who would soon be unable to return to the US for a while. About a month later, the day of Keith's departure finally arrived, and our family went to the airport to see him off. He was carrying a bunch of toys, and he seemed so excited to see his grandchild that he looked like he might start dancing. Although it was a time for goodbyes, his happiness was so infectious that we couldn't help but smile. We waved our hands as we watched him head towards the boarding gate. A few months later, we received several airmail letters from Keith, each containing photos. In every photo, he was holding his granddaughter looking incredibly happy. My sister said, "They've been nagging us. They want to see their grandchild's face." It's definitely Keith's influence. I agreed. My sister and I had begun to hear our parents expressing their desire for a grandchild as well. Seeing Keith's happy face and the adorable photos of his granddaughter made me want to have a family of my own. But next time I get married, I vow to choose someone who isn't a mama's boy and who will genuinely cherish my family.
Returned from maternity leave to uncover husband's betrayal, I stepped in with confidence and gave them a memorable surprise.
How was it? The ultimate hospitality, straight from me. With a contoured face, I looked down on my husband and his affair partner, seizing the perfect moment to deliver my well-rehearsed line. I am Madeline. I am 28 years old. I have been married to John, who is 30 years old, for 2 years now. I finally conceived my long-awaited child, and I am in the midst of a blissful maternity life. Currently, I am 3 months pregnant and staying at my parents' house, separated from my husband. Originally, when I was in the last month of pregnancy, I was supposed to go back to my parents' house for home birth. Since you are a first-time mother, if something happens while you are alone at home, I might not be able to rush home immediately because of work commitment. I would feel safer if you stayed at home with your parents. Upon hearing these words from my husband, I decided to return to my parents' house a bit earlier than planned. I don't really worry because my prenatal checkups have always been smooth sailing. But if it brings peace of mind to my husband? At that time, I had no idea that my husband was doing such things behind my back. Around the time I entered the 8th month of pregnancy, I needed something that I had left at home, so I drove my car back to the house. It happened to be a Saturday, and my husband was supposed to be home on his day off. Wanted to surprise him. I intentionally didn't inform him in advance. I arrived at the house and quietly opened the door. "Welcome home. How was your day at work?" I energetically entered the living room, saying my usual greeting, but there was no one there. It was already past 12 o'clock, so normally he would be awake. And the curtains were also open. It didn't seem like he had stayed out overnight. I wondered if he had gone back to sleep for a bit. I peeked into the bedroom, but sure enough, my husband was nowhere to be found. It seemed like he had gone out. Well, it's a day off, so these things happen, right? Feeling a bit disappointed that my surprise failed, I shrugged it off and only took what I needed before leaving the house. That night, when I called my husband, in between updates and chit-chat, "By the way, were you somewhere today?" I casually asked, not thinking much of it.
What are you talking about? I didn't go anywhere. Yesterday, I had to work late due to overtime, so I just slept at home.
That was my husband's reply. "Oh, I see. You had a tough day. Good job." Although he played dumb, I could sense that something wasn't right deep inside. My husband was lying. But why? Why would he need to hide the fact that he went out on a day off? That small suspicion at that time remained like a thorn in me. The following week, I headed home once again. I planned it for the weekday daytime when my husband was not around. And once again, I kept it a secret from him. I told my parents that I was going to retrieve something from home. But the true purpose was to uncover the truth behind my suspicions about my husband. I quietly opened the door and entered the room. But my husband wasn't there. I could freely search the entire house without any hesitation. To cut the chase, there was a harvest. A tremendous harvest, indeed. Evidence of the affair came pouring out in abundance. Among them, the most significant evidence was found on the computer. Perhaps due to the carelessness of assuming I, his wife, wouldn't be present, he hadn't set the password for the computer. I immediately looked at the data, and there was a folder named 3. It looked suspicious at first glance. When I opened it, it was filled with images of a young woman and my husband smiling together joyously. They had been going out to various places, from trendy cafes to restaurants with breathtaking night views, even Disneyland. And shockingly, there were pictures of them on a hotel bed. Checking the data on the photos, I discovered that their dates had started approximately a month before I had planned to return to my parents' house. I proceeded to copy all the images onto an external memory and safely stored it in my bag. I couldn't recognize the face of the woman involved in the affair. First and foremost, I wanted to know who this woman was and where she came from, so I devised a plan. I went to a nearby shopping mall to buy ingredients of dinner and return home, waiting for my husband.
Whoa!
Huh? When my husband came home, he seemed surprised to find me there. "I came here as a surprise to make dinner. I'll take care of everything. So why don't you go take a bath?" With that, I swiftly ushered my husband into the bathroom. After confirming the sound of water from the shower, I took out my husband's smartphone from his bag. The lock number hadn't been changed since I accidentally saw it before, so I easily logged in. And there, I discovered emails exchanged frequently between my husband and his affair partner. In those mails, the partner's name was also written as 3. Curious, I checked the contents and found a name that seemed to belonged to a woman named Tria. Latin for 3 is Tria, so it must be related. I took photos of the affair partner's full name, contact information, and any other details I could find on my own phone, but I ran out of time. My husband seemed to have finished his shower and came out. I returned his phone to his bag, as if nothing had happened. After that, I had dinner with my husband with an innocent look on my face. Since it's gotten late, maybe I should stay overnight. Suddenly, I decided to spend the night. We engaged in casual conversation before going to bed. In the middle of the night, I quietly got up and set up email forwarding on my husband's phone. Now, I would have access to all the exchanges between my husband and his affair partner. Looking down at my peacefully sleeping husband, a triumphant smile crept across my face. The next day, my husband went to work, and I returned to my parents' house. Within that day, I bought a personal laptop for myself. I had a computer at home that my parents were using, but I didn't feel comfortable opening images of my husband's affair or backing up evidence of the affair. Using the computer I purchased, I researched on the internet and found that I could divorce my husband based on the evidence of the affair I had on hand. Turns out, I can get alimony too. However, I wasn't just thinking about myself anymore. While gathering evidence for a critical moment, I decided to prioritize the birth of my child first. 2 months later, I safely gave birth to a baby girl. Although my husband wasn't present at the delivery, he came to visit me and offered kind words. But I knew that on the night he returned from the hospital visit, he had met with his affair partner, Tria. To avoid stress on my body, I tried my best not to think about my husband until the birth was over. After giving birth and gazing at my daughter's sleeping face, I deeply thought to myself, it's just not possible. I should get a divorce from my husband. It's absolutely unforgivable that someone could have such a precious and adorable child and still have no intention of stopping their infidelity. However, just separating from my husband wouldn't satisfy me. I want to make him feel the consequences of his actions. While contemplating such thoughts and continuing to read the emails forwarded to me daily from my husband, I came up with an idea. I explained the situation to my sister, who lived with our parents, and asked for her cooperation. We waited for that day. It was Friday, 1 p.m. My sister and I were in a parked car near the house, filming a video. She was in charge of the camera, and I played the roles of producer and host. Finally, it's time to execute the plan. Let's go to John's place. I hope he'll be happy. Facing my sister's camera, I spoke cheerfully. We paused the filming and moved to the front of the house. Carefully, we quietly unlocked the door to avoid making any noise. We resumed recording the video and silently tiptoed through the hallway until we reached the bedroom. As I listened attentively, I could hear the voices of my husband and his affair partner talking. When I saw my wife the other day, she had gained weight and completely turned into an old lady. I don't need an aging wife. You're right. She's finished as a woman. Hey, when will you leave her? I want to be with you as soon as possible. In the next moment, I burst through the bedroom door with a wide smile on my face. Hey, John! And you, right next to him. Welcome to the surprise party. Wait, Madeline? Yes, I'm Madeline. And the aging wife. Today, we've come to celebrate your birthday, John. I cheerfully made the declaration and looked towards the bed, but I was taken aback. My husband was lying on his back, completely naked, with handcuffs on both wrists. Unfortunately, I recognized these items. When I searched the house in my husband's absence, I had found them hidden in the back of the closet and took photos of evidence. I never expected to encounter them again in this manner. For some reason, the strange situation had me all worked up. Oh, it seems the costume party is already in full swing. I feel underdressed. I didn't bring enough enthusiasm. I playfully joked and made noise with the party cracker in my hand, facing my sister's camera. Happy birthday! My husband, taken aback, muttered quietly.
My birthday's next month, though.
Oh, right. I got so caught up in planning the surprise celebration that I completely forgot. Seeing me in a super high-spirited state, my husband was at a loss for words. I couldn't let him think that this was the end of it. With my next move in mind, I took out a container from the cooler bag. I've also prepared a celebratory dish for you. It's something a little out of the ordinary. A luxurious delicacy. Give it a try. I opened the lid of the container and showed it to my husband.
What is this?
My husband screamed and stumbled back, hitting his head against the wall. What is it? It's pizza.
Pizza? Where?
I mean, it's insect pizza. What I showed to my husband was a homemade insect pizza with crickets, mealworms, and beetle larvae placed on top of the pizza dough. Do you know about entomophagy? The consumption of insects as food. In fact, insects are being recognized worldwide as the food of the future. That can help solve environmental issues and food crisis. However, my husband absolutely hates insects. He has an ingrained aversion to even looking at or touching them. Of course, I am well aware of this. Don't worry. The ingredients were purchased from a manufacturer online. They are meant for consumption. Besides, John and Tria, if you were the only two left after humanity demise, you wouldn't survive. Unless you could eat insects, right? You would become like Adam and Eve. Wouldn't you?
Huh? Why would you say that?
The affair partner seemed speechless, perhaps because I called her name. I also won't expect that I was speechless when I read your emails. No matter how much I, the wife, am in the way. If humanity were perish, and only the two of us remained, we could get married, right?
I feel the same way. It would be nice to be like Adam and Eve.
I can't believe they said such embarrassing things without hesitation. Come on, John. Eat it. Just eat it. I won't take no for answer. I approached my husband with a big pizza in hand. Look! Even the queen over there. Stop daydreaming and remove the handcuffs. In this situation, there's no way to escape from the affair. Besides, my husband probably already knows that behind my playful demeanor, I'm actually furious. Eventually, my husband seemed to give in. With trembling hands, he picked up the pizza and shoved it into his mouth. He cried out in a voice that wouldn't come out, tears streaming down his face. Now, Tria, it's your turn. Tria, with a serious expression and a low voice, extended her hand slowly and ate the pizza with teary eyes. Sitting with their legs folded under them, the queen and her subordinate indulged in the insect pizza. It was quite spectacle. And soon enough, my husband, he rubbed his throat and began to look distressed. I wondered if he couldn't swallow it. I fetched some tea from my water bottle and handed it to him. He took a mouthful of it. He forcefully spat it out.
Peter,
What is this?
it's tea. You're lying. Is it poison or something?
How rude to think that. It's just herbal tea. Good for your body.
Herbal tea? What the hell is this?
I looked down upon my husband, coughing due to the overwhelming bitterness in his naked form, and the queen sitting with a vacant expression on her face. I declared loudly, "So, how was it? Did you like it?" It was my finest hospitality. After recreating the iconic quote that gained fame during Japan's Olympic bid, I nonchalantly proceeded to eat a pizza, topped with crickets right in front of the two. With that, the two of them said, and holding their mouth. The truth is, I have no problem eating crickets. That's because my mother is from the countryside, and sometimes, along with vegetables sent by my grandmother and relatives, we would receive packed crickets. Those were left out for a few days to let the feces come out and then fried and eaten. I personally think they have a mild and easy to eat flavor, but it seems like many people have an aversion to them. Now, let's have another one instead of dessert after dinner. Come to think of it, John and Tria, aren't you supposed to be at work right now? Caught off guard by the sudden remark, the woman panicked and said, "I'm sorry. Don't tell anyone at the company." Then my husband rushed to correct her.
That's not it. I'm not working. I just took the afternoon off.
I smirked and laughed. Oh, really? Well then, I'll call the company and check. I took out my smartphone and searched for my husband's workplace number.
Wait. There's no need to check.
Why not?
Because
I had an appointment with a client for a sales pitch.
but they canceled on me. Suddenly, I had no work. So I haven't informed the company yet.
Give up already. You have a terrible attitude. I know everything. How many times have you cheated on me under the guise of business during work hours? At that moment, the woman got angry and shouted, "This is awful. You're exposing everything to your wife. You lied about leaving her and marrying me, didn't you? I've had enough. I'm leaving." I stood up and tried to stop the woman, who was about to leave with her clothes in hand. And I said, "Wait. Before you leave, please sign this declaration." It contained an acknowledgement of the affair with my husband and a commitment to engage in discussions regarding alimony and other matters in the future. I also asked her to provide her address and contact information, of course. Just so you know, I have gathered evidence of the affair. If you try to resort to violence against me and run away, I will go to the police with the video I am currently recording as evidence. The woman sighed and reluctantly signed the declaration, showing no signs of remorse, but realizing she couldn't escape the situation. Then, I also had my husband sign the same document, and I stopped recording the video. My sister and I returned to our parents' house. Afterward, I told my parents about my husband's affair and the decision to get a divorce. But they weren't very surprised. I had refrained from telling my parents anything to avoid causing them worry, but it seems they had a faint sense of it. It turns out, I had stopped bringing up my husband's topics in conversations. I deeply realized that I couldn't hide anything from my parents, and I felt a sense of guilt. I sought help from my family and found a lawyer specializing in divorce, and I was able to successfully divorce my husband. I obtained custody of the child, and my husband and his affair partner were required to pay me alimony. Furthermore, my husband has the obligation to provide monthly child support for our child. The images found on my husband's computer and the emails exchanged between them served as sufficient evidence of the affair. The video that my sister took of me that day, when I went over the scene of the affair, I just saved it and put it in my collection. Upon looking back, I feel embarrassed because I realized that I had gone too far and acted recklessly. I was able to get him to sign the declaration, which was the original purpose of the project. Seeing the two pitiful faces was a bit refreshing, so I guess we can call the result a blessing in disguise. It has been 6 months since then. After divorcing my husband, I had been living with my daughter at my parents' house. Until my daughter turns 1 year old, I am focusing on childcare. But gradually, I plan to enroll her in daycare and eventually return to work. While I lead a peaceful life, my ex-husband and his affair partner seems to be facing various difficulty. My husband and I got married while working at the same company, as there is still a colleague of mine at my husband's work who has returned to work after maternity leave. I was informed by the colleague that my ex-husband, instead of going to a client's place as he claimed, was actually going on a date with his affair partner. The affair was discovered by the company, and he received a salary reduction as a disciplinary action. Word got out that the reason for the divorce was my ex-husband's infidelity, and that the other woman was Tria, a junior colleague at work. Tria lost her standing at work and decided to resign from the company. As for my ex-husband,
Now that we're finally divorced, let's be together.
it seems that John proposed to Tria, but she firmly rejected him. When Tria saw John acting flustered in front of me, she apparently lost interest in him instantly. I thought bullying you, John, was my privilege alone. I heard that he was rejected for reasons I couldn't understand. My ex-husband, left all alone, turns to his parents for help. But even they practically disowned him upon learning about his actions. I've heard that they have no intention of providing any assistance. With child support payments to make and unable to quit his job, he can't rely on financial support from his parents either. He lacks the energy to pursue a job change. I heard that he plans to rent a cheap place in an accident-prone building and move there soon, leasing a rental car. Back when we were searching for a place to live together before getting married, I made a joke. Accident-prone properties have low rent. Why not go check them out as a trial? When I said that, my ex-husband got semi-irritated. Huh? What are you saying? Absolutely not. He used to say that, but he has changed quite a bit. Or rather, it's more like choosing the lesser of two evils, isn't it? As for myself, the only things that have changed since then are that I have come to dislike the number 3. Amidst the busy life of single-handedly raising a child, I managed to regain my pre-pregnancy figure. Although my ex-husband called me an old lady, I strive to become a beautiful middle-aged woman. At the very least, I focus on skincare, maintaining my style, and primarily devote myself to childcare. Being a first-time parent comes with many uncertainties, and there are days when things don't go well and I feel down. However, my daughter's growth is an irreplaceable reward and a source of motivation. Lately, she has become more expressive, and watching her crawl and try to stand, it is as if she is a wind-up doll, moving around with such cuteness that I can't resist. Now, I have plans to meet up with a local friend today. Although she doesn't have children of her own, she suspects her husband of infidelity and wants someone to talk to. If my experiences can be of any help, I'm willing to share and offer assistance. All those cheaters out there in the world. They should suffer the consequences and learn their lesson.